I wanted to say hello, welcome you to the first of our sort of educational series. So classes in session. We're going to do this until this reset in darkness is over. We thought it would be a really good time. I want to thank Andy and Katie and Jim for sort of getting us going at Beet. One of the reasons I'm such a big fan of Beet and Andy and the team is because we share a similar sort of set of values where, it's really important to get back to the industry. And what Beet does is help create forums to facilitate really valuable conversation, as well as then also provide meaningful education, right? So our goal together, Beet and myself, is to just continue to be lighthouses during this darkness and get us through and offer some education. I figure a lot of you are probably at home, you're dislocated. Many of you are probably homeschooling. So what better time for us to go back to school ourselves and maybe brush up on some of our knowledge and just use this as an opportunity to educate, to improve our vocabulary. So when we come back to work and we're at the water cooler, we're all using the same words to mean the same thing. And we can just make the conversation more meaningful, both now and afterwards, right? So it's also really important, which I said in one of our first sessions, that we don't neglect the youngest in our industry during this time. You've got these young, hungry youth, fresh out of university that are entering our industry and our agencies, et cetera. And now all of a sudden they're displaced, they're alone working from home, and that's gotta be hard. And so I think this is a great opportunity to provide them with information, with education to help them continue to have momentum and move forward in their career, even though they're sort of separated and away from an office and a team where they normally would get that kind of nourishment and self-improvement. So whether you're a Titan or you're a newcomer, join us in this educational series for as long as this reset goes on. And when the darkness is all over, we're all going to be shining brighter together as a result. I really do believe that. So recently, Furious Corp produced a TV 101 series. It was sort of an educational series, and one of the components of it was a dictionary. It was a TV and video dictionary, and the link is now on your screen. And it's actually an interactive dictionary that our hope was that people would bookmark it and keep it sort of in their browser, and when they need it, go to it. And we make the commitment that we're going to keep it up to date and continue to refresh the definitions, etc. I think this is a really great tool. We'll also provide a physical downloaded version for you. But what we've done is we've chunked this into sections and thematics. So we've got sort of 12 different sections, each have a different theme around them and the definitions and how it's organized. And we thought that would be a really great jump off point to use as our syllabus and how to guide us and how we structure the course into sections and then each individual class, right? So we're going to use that. We recommend you either bookmark it, take a look at it, or whenever we send out the email through Beet, we'll be sure and include it for you. So, this sort of dictionary itself is going to provide us a guide, right? The first section happens to be about TV, broadcast, and cable, and that's going to be our jump off point today. But if we look at the next, let's just start with 5 weeks. Our first section, as I said, and our first session today is going to be about broadcast and cable, traditional television as we know it. We're going to do an overview of the definitions and the sort of lexicon and vocabulary, as well as then talk about the history of it. In the second class or session, we're going to dive into the commercial models for TV and video. So ad load, the rise of digital video, how that's impacting it, video ad products, data-driven TV products, all that fun stuff that we've heard and kind of the jargon that is moving around in our industry today. We're going to dive into that and unpack it. In the third class or session, we're going to get into ad targeting and the ad tech stack. So really how technology and data enables the delivery of more sort of specialized ad products, and then the currencies of measurement and digital standards, which are essential for scale. In the fourth class or session, we're going to start to unpack what is slightly less sexy, but actually still really important and very greatly impacted by all the changes in our industry. And that is the traditional systems and workflows of television, the jobs, roles, and functions and responsibility in TV buying and selling on both sides of the value chain through and through. And then ultimately the future of TV advertising. Talk about things like addressable and advanced, which were top of mind sort of prior to this reset, are going to come back in favor as far as how much time we spend talking about them after the darkness is over. I'm quite sure. The fifth session or class, I think that we'll end up talking about the economics of television, particularly the role that inventory management and pricing play in portfolio optimization. So yield optimization, yield management. That's obviously what I spend my days, and I get excited to wake up every morning and talk and think about and help folks with on the sell side of the value chain. But the reality is that is an increasing sort of matter of importance and to be considered for buyers as well. So says Mr. Weiser from Group M in his newsletter earlier this week, of course. So I think, both sides of the value chain have to think about managing a portfolio, and we're going to talk about the big picture and how to do that and what those best practices are as well in one of these sessions. So This is only a proposal. It's just an idea. If you have other ideas or things you want to talk about, I can go crazy. I love talking about macro trends, the dynamics and economics of advertising and media. We can stay as high level as you want and as academic and cerebral as you want. Anybody that's taken an Economics 101 course sort of knows all about this, right? There's lots for us to talk about. And there's lots more also on the Furious Corp website if you want to go there. We've published a lot of thought leadership and educational content. So maybe use that as a jump off point to tell us what you like to talk about and dive into. So let's do this. We're going to about 10 to 15 minutes every week. I'm going to do my best to keep it to 15 minutes, and it's going to be fun. I promise. If you participate, it's going to be even more fun. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So although it's Wednesday, it's a day of throwback, right? It's not Thursday, but it's Wednesday throwback. So I just want to talk about traditional television, right? Television, TV, and broadcast, right? Let's start with a definition. So television, which, let's use that word collectively, is really any premium long form video content, right? We sort of refer to it as traditional TV, which is often delivered over cable or satellite distributors or through those operators. It's now delivered over the top as well, right? Those same feeds are delivered through over the top services like Sling, for example, right? But the idea when we say traditional TV, we often refer to it as what is programmed or delivered in a schedule programming, live broadcasts, for example, and then ads are typically inserted in at a scheduled time for that, right? And there's a certain number of ads per hour. We often call that linear TV, right? That's the construct. So that was the beginning. And in the beginning, that's all we had, right? So between sort of 1950 and 1970, there were only three big networks: CBS, NBC, and ABC. And they accounted for 95% of primetime viewing, right? Compared to now. So TV buying and TV advertising buying was relatively simple, right? So it was through the initial technology behind cable that was first developed, because the goal was in 1948 that we had to figure out how to get these over-the-air signals, because broadcasters were broadcast over the air over radio. We had to figure out how to get this content, which had to be national, to very sort of rural, small towns in America, right? The US cable delivery system as we know it didn't actually start to become mainstream until 1970s, right? And actually HBO was the first cable network in 1975 to light it up, and the rest is history, right? So let's get into the definition. So broadcast television. It's TV delivered by the network affiliate model, right? So it's over the public airwaves, and the major networks now are a little bit bigger: CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, and CW, right? When we actually look at the advertising within broadcast television, we sort of chunk it. So national broadcast is specifically ad inventory that is bought directly from those broadcast networks, right, to reach massive national audiences. So that is fishing with the net, pure at its purest sense, right? That includes a lot of the most expensive inventory that has a national reach, right? So the Super Bowl, Oscars, etc. That's actually where you're getting the most highly valued units that you can within the television sort of industry, if you will. Local broadcast is actually local stations that have specific, they're in specific geographies or DMAs, right, that actually allow you to buy within a specific geography a spot on the affiliate local programming or their local ad units on that national local affiliate. So your local Duluth ABC station is a local broadcast station, of which all of these have typically been consolidated into large local broadcast station groups. Cable television, in the purest sense, is television delivered via radio frequency singles, or many are now actually satellite, et cetera. But it's delivered through coaxial cable, light pulses, fiber optics, things like that. It's the infrastructure, the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts that actually gets TV to your living room, right? And it's also sort of collectively referred to the cable networks outside of the broadcast networks like ESPN, Fox News, CNN, USA, etc., right? So ultimately, when we look at this, there are packages that are sold by these providers of programming and distributors of programming that are national and local in nature, et cetera. When we say local cable, And we talk about advertising inventory from that perspective versus cable TV advertising. We're typically talking about the inventory that cable networks give as part of their sort of distribution agreements with cable operators of 2 minutes per hour to sell ad time within that content. So that's the Comcast, the Directs, etc. They actually have inventory to sell within each hour. It's 2 minutes. And when we talk about television advertising inventory as a portfolio of products, when we say local cable, we mean the 2 minutes per hour they get to sell. And by the way, that's typically what is addressable. Interconnect is a very unique flavor of cable, right? It's a means of buying a collection of zones within a specific DMA. And zones are smaller sort of physical geographical areas that typically are subdivisions of larger DMAs or markets, right? Or urban areas, et cetera, footprints, right? So it's a way to further chunk all that physical space up, which is enabled by the distribution of fixed infrastructure to actually chunk it like that. Traditional TV is really a lean back viewing experience, right? And we see that as sort of, there's typically a fixed number of commercial breaks per hour. We'll talk about ad load in the future and how that's changing. Linda Yaccarino had an announcement today, but we really divvy that up, right? And within that hour, different players in the value chain between the creation of the content and the national broadcast, the local sort of broadcast itself and affiliate distribution, and then ultimately what is the physical distribution through the operators or the satellite providers, they all get some of that inventory, right? And that has a lot to do with how TV is bought and sold and who has what. The regulation of television is really important. It's important to understand if you want to have the big picture, right? It's really important just to get your head around the fact that TV and cable are regulated markets, right? So in broadcast television, over the air or OTA, right? It's really radio spectrum the government has provided to broadcasters in exchange for ensuring free access to programming via antenna. So in order to get that radio frequency to broadcast their programming and their network, they have to promise they're going to make that content available to, most of some percentage of the US, right? Physically make it available. That's their burden. And that's a value exchange, right? So your rabbit ears or the new cooler ones that you put on the window in your apartment in New York City, that actually, it's required that we make those, the antennas, et cetera, are implemented and deployed to actually enable almost all of America to get free broadcast television. Cable operators are also regulated, which is very important, right? So that's why there's a limited number of operators that can provide you cable television in your geography, right? Wherever you live, you may only have one or two. I have two, I think, here. And so ultimately, that's because the same reason. Only a few are granted access by the government to install and deploy the infrastructure to actually enable the delivery of cable, internet, telephone, now voice over internet, telephone over IP, VoIP telephone. And it's all runs the same infrastructure, which is why you get the triple play, right? So it makes sense. That's why it's also a utility. So we call it the truck roll, if you ever heard that phrase. It's that final mile. It's actually getting the truck that rolls up out front of your house and finishing that infrastructure so you can get that signal to that house and they can have cable, TV, telephony, etc. I could totally go down a rabbit hole when opportunity on Ma Bell, Baby Bells, all that history, that legacy. I'm not going to do that today. If it's something you want to hear more about, let me know and we'll talk about it in a future class, right? So this regulation has created a paradigm in these two segments of our industry and our value chain of an oligopolistic market, right? An oligopolistic market is a state of limited competition. It's where markets, the market is only shared by a small number of sellers or producers, right? So it's less competitive. And that's good and bad, right? So ultimately, it means that because it's controlled and regulated, you're not going to have price gouging. It's controlled as a utility, et cetera. It also means that you may have less choice, right? So if you're not happy with the performance of your internet, you don't have a ton of options. So at one point in time, before cable TV was the norm, right, we were only limited to a few channels, and advertising was the most important revenue stream for broadcasters and local stations. I mean, that's actually really significant to understand that it's only in recent times that, or recent times, meaning the last 30, 40 years, right, that this broadcast content and cable networks have started to be distributed through cable and satellite providers, that ultimately their revenue distribution has changed, right? So at one point it was just advertising, but now ultimately what's become more important is carriage and retrans fees also. So the first broadcast service via satellite in the US was launched in 1991. And this is actually really important because cable, as I've said, is controlled geographically. Satellite, which is now a new way of distributing broadcast programming, is actually national because it's via satellite, right? It's much bigger than that. And the first sort of satellite was available in 1991, right? So satellite guys don't have to run the final mile, but they still ultimately do have to do a truck roll because they have to deliver a satellite and put it on your roof, for example, right? So it's regulated in many ways, and the burden is less challenging, and they now have a national footprint. But satellite providers have many of the same challenges that traditional cable operators do as well, although they may not be running cables under the ground. So they're nationwide, which is amazing. And ultimately, once the rabbit ears began to be replaced by set-top boxes en masse, these fees became more and more important, as I was beginning to say a few minutes ago, right? So retransmission fees, which for local broadcast stations are the fees they get to have their local stations distributed by satellite and cable operators, known as MVPDs, right? So multi-channel video programming distributors. That's a collective term for cable and for satellite. So the retrans fees for the local stations, and then the national broadcasters are sort of getting carriage fees for their cable networks, right? Which is one of the reasons that we started to ultimately see this proliferation of cable networks. So not only could national broadcasters like NBC cast a wider net and reach a broader audience, but ultimately it gave them more negotiation power to actually, when they went to the table, to negotiate those carriage fees, right? At the end of the day, in any satellite or cable distribution agreement, that distributor gets 2 minutes per hour. And that can be a lot. But it's not that big. Let's be clear. I mean, these are businesses in the billions of dollars for some of these MVPDs, right? Their ad businesses are really, really meaningful. And we're going to talk about ad load and how that's managed in the future. But just to get a sense of the order of magnitude, right? The largest cable operator in the US is Comcast. So Comcast NBCU is the parent. Comcast Communications is a subsidiary that offers, cable, internet, et cetera, and then also has an ad business called Effective. Right. So if you look at their business, their total Comcast Communications revenue in 2019, according to their public disclosures, was $58 billion. Advertising was only $2.5 billion of that. So it makes you say, there's a lot of money in the very unsexy infrastructure of television that should not be overlooked or forgotten when we talk about the economics of television as an industry as a whole, right? So again, if you took Economics 101 or macroeconomics in traditional media, this is very unique. Controlled, regulated markets create unique paradigms, especially when all the new entrants coming in are significantly less regulated, and they're disrupting these legacy businesses who have heavy fixed infrastructure costs and capital expenditures they have to make sure they derive, basically revenue and profitability from for the foreseeable future. So I can talk about that as much as you want. I can talk about a lot. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions right now. Nope. All right. So my apologies for the hiccup in the beginning. My hope is that these sessions, sort of go into a library and can be meaningful for you, for your teams, and they can be used sort of on an ongoing basis, even beyond this reset, when the lights are shining bright again. And I just want to thank you for being part of this and giving me a platform to try and give back and do something meaningful with this time that I have. So light to all, love to all, peace to all. Thank you so much. Be well.